So this video is going to go through what kind of supports you need when you're working with the RNF or the Daymar and beeswax products. So the thing you need to think about, first of all, is to remember that anything goes. There is no one right or wrong way, and there are lots and lots of different options for you with this. So the first thing is any porous, rigid support. So when I'm doing a class, and especially when you're first learning, these can be really cool. So this is literally just some mount card. I happen to have a friend who frames his own photographs, and he always loses the inside insert. So these turn out to be absolutely perfect for that. I just sliced them up, and I just got lots of little test pieces. And the nice thing with these is you don't get too precious about them, so perfect for when you're just starting. The disadvantage of using this is when you get up to any large scale, they will start to bend. The heat they will warp. So they're fine for a little small piece, but not good for working large scale. There are a number of options for pre-made. So basically, as I say, anything which is you want a solid, rigid support, and sometimes they're gessoed and sometimes they're not. So you've got a few different options. So Encaustic, Ampersand create these really nice pre-gessoed, beautiful quality. They're absolutely stunning to work with boards. They come in a variety of sizes. So they come in a very thin profile like this, or they come like on a cradled board. So you can see they're much thicker. So you can, which way around they are, you can buy them in this pre-made format. It's quite a pricey option to do that in this way, so it might be a consideration for you, it might not. So some other options are, you can buy plain boards, which you then gesso yourself. Basswood and birchwood ply are both very good options, but there are any different number. So these are just a standard ply, which I've had somebody cut down to size for me, and you'd need to kind of tidy up the edges and everything on these. So you can kind of go for a real sort of budget range. So these are some others that I had cut down at my local hardware store. So you can kind of get quite interesting in different sizes and ranges. And then sometimes I'll put my own supports on these again so that they stay rigid and solid. All depends. There are so many different ways. The important thing is to remember there's no definite one right or wrong way. It's just a case of trying and seeing what works for you, what works for your budget, and going from there. If you buy, you've got a couple of options. If you go onto plain wood, you could either paint directly on, which I sometimes do with some of my portraits. I quite like the background of that. If I'm going to cover the whole piece, as I've done here, what I would do first is I'd actually take this plain piece of wood, and I would use personally, some people make their own gesso. Personally, I use the RNF gesso. So I would give that a couple of really good coatings of gesso before I start painting on there. As I say, Ampersand do these different ranges, come in different size thicknesses. But other companies do them as well. So this is a Jackson's one. So they all have different price points. So kind of to go and do your research and see what you can find there for you. Here's one that I've started to gesso. It's a bit bashed around now. But what I tend to do when I'm preparing my boards, if I'm gessoing one myself, or even if I'm using one of the Ampersand cradled boards here, to keep these edges nice and clean, what I tend to do is get a tape and tape around the edges just to keep it nice and clean underneath. But that's just a personal preference. And then once I finish my painting, I'll peel that off. This is an old one I've had kicking around for a while. There are a couple here that I've got in progress, exactly the same thing. So these are wooden boards that I've gessoed myself. I've taped the edges, and they're not finished, but they're currently in the process of being pigmented and coloured and working on to create finished artworks. So principal things to remember: anything goes as long as it is a rigid support. You don't want it to bend. So you need something solid so that you can build up the layers, because that's going to support your layers for you. And And yeah, a whole variety. There's any different number of ways to go around it. Everybody has a different opinion, so find something that works for you, but just try and remember those key things. It needs to be porous to absorb, to take in the wax and your layers, and it needs to be a fairly solid support. These are okay for small pieces of work, mount card for practicing, but when you get onto a bigger scale, you're going to need something with a bit more stability. Okay.